right. Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to our Veramo community call for the month of August. Thank you once again for being here. So as usual, if you've attended these calls like once or twice, you should know how we roll, kind of. We basically start with basic introduction or chit chats, kind of, and then we move to community and technical updates, after which we have our segments from a guest who is usually our community member, a member of the community, and then we move over to an open discussion segment or question and answer segment, as the case may be. So we don't have a lot of community updates to give, so I'll basically hand it over to Mercia to move on with the technical updates. So Mercia, over to you.
Hey, folks. So yeah, I guess the biggest addition since our previous community call is alignment with the DIDCOM spec in terms of cryptographic algorithms supported. So the spec defines several key wrapping and content encryption algorithms as optional, recommended, or required. And previously, we were only implementing the optional one. And our latest implementation also adds support for the recommended and required ones for the X25519 key agreement key. Based on this, some defaults have changed. Like since there's now, by default, if not otherwise specified, messages will be encrypted using the recommended one, which means that the latest version of Veramo encrypts messages in a way that previous versions might not be able to decrypt them. But the other way around works just fine. And I guess going forward, this work stream will mean adding support for multiple elliptic curves, and I think the next one is P256, since we already have all the dependencies in place. Yeah, in our immediate future, you'll see a release with small fixes of like for this key and like exporting a mapping between keys and algorithms, so that KMS implementations can reference that instead of like coming up with their own. And also, you might have noticed a strong stream of commits going into the Agent Explorer project. Our colleague here, Simon, is gradually applying the principles of like modularity and extensibility to that project as well. So you'll be able to create these UI plugins as well as the logic plugins that you can do with Veramo. So hopefully that'll come in handy, especially for quick demos, proof of concepts, and all of that. So yeah, that's it from me.
All right, thank you, Marcia, for the updates. So up next, we would have Niels. Niels is here. He's the CTO at Sphereon, and he's going to be giving us a 20-minute presentation on OpenID for verifiable credentials. And before he gets started, I just want to like make a quick ask from our community members, whether you're watching this as like a YouTube video, and then for our community members here, if you have any ideas of like or suggestions on how we can make the Veramo community better, there are things you want to see, or like basically any feedback or suggestion you have, or things that you want to see, just reach out to me on Discord. I would love to hear from you all. So take it up from here, Niels.
Sure, thanks. Can everyone hear me and see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hey, well, let me start first by a quick introduction. Niels Klomp, CTO and co-founder of Sphereon. And Sphereon is an organization which has a background in enterprise content management and these days in self-sovereign identities. And this is the agenda. So today I will mainly be talking about the OpenID for verifiable credentials, specifications, and standards. In the invite, I also mentioned to be talking about Gaia X, but in creating this presentation, there was already so much information in the presentation that if I would also need to cram in Gaia X, then probably people will not be able to follow, or I would have to go over it really quickly, and I'm already cramped for time in this presentation. So happy to do that in a separate session or in a different community call. So if people are interested, just reach out to me, and happy to provide a separate presentation. Okay, quickly about Sphereon. As I mentioned, a background in enterprise content management and business process automation, but for the last few years, mainly involved in blockchain technology and decentralized identity technology. Most of our work is open source with permissive licenses. Not all of our work is open source because we also have to make some money. Our clients are, for instance, banks, governments, both central and local, healthcare industry, hospitals and clinical trial industry, education, universities, and vocational colleges, for instance. So the OpenID for verifiable credential technology. So this is a nice picture from Maaike van Leuken from TNO, which he created roughly a year ago. And this is sort of an overview of most of the specifications which are available in the self-sovereign identity world, mapped on the trust over IP technology stack. And people in this call might know, but if you start out in this world, then in the beginning you might think you get it, and then you notice that basically around every corner there's 5 new specifications happening, and then you come up with a picture like this, sort of showing all the different specifications. What we've done in the Netherlands, or starting out in the Netherlands, is creating an intro profile, and we've done that because we noticed that the SSI world, so the actual parties which are creating solutions using SSI, already have enough problems to keep up with all of these specifications, let alone if you have external organizations that want to be working with this technology to make sure that they are interoperable. You have quite a nightmare on your hands with all of these specifications. So we've decided to base this profile on the OpenID for verifiable credential technologies, which you can roughly see on the right-hand side. So those are self-issued OpenID self-issued OpenID version 2, OpenID for verifiable presentations, and OpenID for verifiable credential issuance. In the process, also presentation exchange is being used, which all of these I will explain later in the session. Right now, the focus is on JOT VCs. Our solutions, since they are based on Veramo, of course, also provide JSON LD support, but the intro profile is based on JOTs. So in here you see a bit more explanation of what this intro profile is about. And we provide low-level libraries for all of these technologies, as well as higher-level integrations, which can be used together with Veramo. And as mentioned, focused on JOTs, but not necessarily only JOTs. One of the reasons why we started this profile, of course, is indeed making sure that parties can start working with the technology. But at the same time, as you might be aware, in Europe, work is being done on the European identity wallet, and for that, a architecture and reference framework has been created, which made some of the same decisions that are being used, for instance, in here, with some exceptions, like, for instance, there's no decision on DIP methods, for instance. So this profile that we've created, intro profile, might not exist anymore in the future because it might be surpassed by the architecture reference framework, or we might have some small distinctions in the future. So, of course, why use these standards? Well, it's pretty simple. I believe that, for instance, DITCOM might be the way in the future in terms of decentralization, in terms of messaging, in terms of business to business and business to consumer messaging, for instance. But at this point in time, you have existing enterprises who are typically already using OAuth2 or OpenID Connect. And with the 3 specifications as part of the OpenID for verifiable credentials track, there's basically now specifications on top of well-known and well-understood technology, although, of course, these 3 specifications, they are their own specifications. So it's not like if you have OpenID Connect, that you would automatically have something like OpenID for verifiable credential issuance or something. One of the really nice things I think about the specs is that they are neutral towards cryptography, neutral towards DID methods. You don't even have to use DID methods if you don't want to, and also support multiple credential formats. So you can have AnonCreds, you can have ISO mobile driver license or MDocs, you can have selective disclosure JOTs, as well as W3C verifiable credentials, either in JOT form or JSON-LD form. And also the nice thing is that they can be combined in a single exchange. So you could have an MDoc together with a JOT VC, for instance, if you want to. Then big technology providers are working on this technology. Microsoft Enter Verified ID probably being the most well-known. Soon they will also support all of these specifications. Right now, the thing missing on their end is the verifiable credential issuance. So they have their own issuance protocol on top of OpenID for verifiable presentations at the moment. EPSI, the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure, is using these specifications, and an awful lot of nice work is also being done on offline attended use cases, in-person use cases, and for instance also using Bluetooth Low Energy with it. So 4 technologies I will be talking about. First of all is the presentation exchange. Presentation exchange is a way for a relying party, for a verifier to create a definition of the credentials and claims they would like to receive. And you can make all kinds of combinations, and you can do selective disclosure, for instance. So as a relying party, you can say, hey, look, I want to have this bank account from you, but only the bank account number, and I want to have your first name. And oh, by the way, it needs to come from these types of credentials. And I am only accepting it if you are using selective disclosure. So don't provide me with the full credentials, for instance. This presentation definition is being transported to the holder wallet, typically using a transport protocol. So that could be DITCOM, but in this case, it's OpenID for verifiable presentations. And well, we have low-level libraries, and that's for most of our software. We have low-level libraries which actually have nothing to do with Veramo. They are standalone libraries in which we typically make the choice to not have too many dependencies. But also that means that we will leave some work to be done on the implementers that want to use those low-level libraries. So, for instance, you will have to provide some callback mechanisms to do signings. We are not making assumptions about keys, about DID methods. For that, we are and have created our SSI SDK, which are extensions on top of Veramo. So those are more higher level solutions in which you have automatically the key management system from Veramo, for instance, the DID support, and then of course the callbacks that I mentioned for the low level libraries, they are integrated, of course, in these SDK modules. So the SIOP and OpenID flow is basically initiated by a user by scanning a QR code or clicking on a deep link. Of course, officially it's initiated by the relying party because they have to provide this QR code or deep link, but typically the first real action from a user is the user scanning the QR or clicking on the URL. And what happens then is that the presentation definition is being transported along in the OpenID for verifiable presentation case with some metadata from the relying party, like for instance, which DID methods are supported, how can you provide a response, what type of signature suites are supported, and other metadata. So once the presentation definition reaches the holder, by the use of the presentation exchange library, automatically starts sort of shifting out all the credentials which are not applicable for the definition. And at that point in time, the library already knows, okay, are we able to satisfy this definition or not? If not, of course, the wallet could provide a warning to the user. But if there are credentials which are applicable, then there still might be a need for the user to do a sub-selection, because you might have multiple bank account credentials, for instance, that would satisfy the example that I gave. And of course, a library cannot on itself determine which bank account account number to share with the relying party. So the user might make a subselection, and once that's done, a verifiable presentation is being created, and that verifiable presentation then contains so-called submission data. And I'm showing that right here in this quick flow. And that submission data is basically a mapping of all the individual claims which are in the verifiable credentials in the verifiable presentation, and maps those onto the presentation definition, so that when this is submitted, the relying party can see, hey, look, all of the requirements I had in my definition are met by these properties. To be clear, our library could also do without those submission data, because it could handle that on itself, unless there again might be some duplicates in there which it might not be able to resolve automatically. So SIOP and OpenID are two different things. They are combined in our library. SIOP is actually peer-to-peer authentication, so no authorization. So SIOP is basically, for instance, using two DIDs, although DIDs are not necessarily strictly necessary, because you could also be using JSON web keys directly. But basically, it's sort of like a challenge response, like a DID authentication, where you have a challenge, and then of course you need to sign it so that the other party knows that you have control over the specific keys. It's based upon OAuth2 and supports both same device flows, as I will show, as well as cross-device flows, as I will also show in a demo. And then you also have the OpenID for verifiable presentations, which is mainly transport indeed of this presentation exchange and transport of the verifiable presentation, which can be done both with SIOP, so peer-to-peer, as well as with regular OpenID Connect. And one thing I didn't mention yet is that, of course, in regular OpenID Connect, you have an identity provider. So you have a third-party solution involved, which could either be run by the relying party, or it could be external. So, for instance, the well-known login with Google or login with Facebook or whatever. Those are external identity providers. And with SIOP, of course, there is no external party. So there's also not an inherent trust. And that's where, for instance, the verifiable credentials could come in together with SIOP, because, of course, the verifiable credentials could be issued by trusted third parties, which the relying party trusts, so that they know that when you start doing the interaction, that although you start out fully anonymously with SIOP, that using the OpenID for verifiable presentations, you're getting the credentials from a trusted party. The libraries that we have also support, for instance, the JOT VC presentation profile from diff, which means that you can be interoperable with other vendors that are adhering to this profile, mainly meaning that you need to support diff-ion, diff-web, but also domain linkage to well-known DIDs, which is not, for instance, diff-web, to be clear. It sort of uses a similar concept in which you are hosting a DID somewhere, of course, on a ledger or somewhere else, and then in the DID you have a service endpoint pointing towards a well-known location on the web, and on the web you have verifiable credentials, which then are signed by the same DID and pointing back to the DID. Well, I've already gone over this for the most part, and for the sake of time, I have to speed up a little bit. So OpenID for verifiable credential issuance is the last specification I want to talk about. Well, as the name already implies, this is a issuer issuing credentials to a holder, and can be integrated into a regular OpenID Connect, or can be done without authentication. And of course, really depends on the use case. So it supports pre-authorized flows, as well as authorized flows, in which you have to do authentication authorization. Again, neutral towards cryptography, whether you want to use DID methods or different credential formats. And can be relatively easily be integrated into regular identity and access management solutions, specifically OAuth2-based solutions, which OpenID Connect, of course, is also one. And the nice thing about it is that, of course, OAuth2 and OpenID Connect, especially OpenID Connect, provides already an identity solution on top of OAuth2, which means that you already have claims, and they are typically a separate concern from the application, meaning that although an application typically is making decisions based upon access tokens, or in the front end maybe using ID tokens to get some information about the user, the OpenID flows itself and the identity provider are typically pretty much separate. And the nice thing about this is, of course, that you now would, next to regular credentials, you would also have verifiable credentials. So they can be pretty similar in terms of how you approach it from an enterprise application. Quickly, some of the work that we are doing. I will show you the personal wallet on the left-hand side, which is a React Native application, fully open source, running on iOS and Android. The middle is the organizational wallet, and actually it's the same application as you see on the right, to be clear, which is a product passport. Both of these solutions will be coming in the next few months, and also mostly open source, meaning that people can just use them, and it's a progressive web application, meaning that you can also use it offline, and of course can scale it on different devices if you want to. So let's go on and do the demo. Yes. So this is a issuance demo, also again fully open source, so everyone can have a look at it. Also provides branding support, so if you want to have it in your own sort of colors and have different images, you can do that. So you can configure it. It has two options. I will first start out with a manual flow, so this is more like a typical onboarding flow. So I'm going to provide some information like my first name, last name, and also let me get my mobile phone. Let me first start the wallet. Well, actually, I have to go through the setup screen first. Of course, that's a one-time thing only. To be clear, this information I'm providing here will never be sent out to our servers or anything. It's just fully self-sovereign. It's just to create a credential within the wallet. So now it's setting up the wallet, and it has a really simple credential with, of course, my first name, last name, and email address, and well, which is the same information I'm entering here. So I will also show you another flow in a moment in which I'm providing this information, of course, from the wallet itself. So let's go back and let's share this information with the issuer. And what's happening now is that I can select a few credentials. So there's 4 in this demo. And those credentials are actually being retrieved from the issuer. So from the OpenID for VCI issuer, it's retrieving the metadata. It's looking at what different types of credentials are available, JOTS, JSON, LD, but also if there's a branding support available. So for instance, these two have background colors and a logo. And then also these text in here, they are branding information. The issuer information is branding information. And as you can see, the next two, they are a bit more elaborate since they have a background in there as well. So whenever I'm selecting a credential, I'm going to the next screen, and now I can scan this QR code with the mobile phone. It now has detected Sphereon as a contact, which I'm going to accept. And as you can see, the credential is now offered to me in my wallet. So I'm also going to accept that. And as you can see, well, the screen has progressed to the next phase. Obviously, I can do similar things from the mobile device. So if I would be going to the same issuer, I can fill out the details, but let's just use the wallet this time around. So I'm going to say, okay, use a wallet. I'm getting the screen. I'm going to open this from the wallet directly. And as you can see, it's now asking me for a credential. in this case for my Sphereon wallet identity credential. I can go to the credential, or I could just have the checkbox only, of course. If I accept it, it now has satisfied the presentation exchange, so the presentation definition. So if I'm now going to share it, it's asking for my PIN code, and it's now sharing this with the application. And as you can see, it now has automatically filled out the data on my mobile phone. Don't be confused with the left screen, of course, because that was a different flow with a different session. So if I'm now sharing this, as you can see, I can now also get the cards from my mobile phone. And if I then open it directly from my application, I can accept it. And as you can see, I now have a permanent residence card as well in here. So just to quickly show a last demo, is the same sort of setup. In this case, I'm doing a manual flow, and I'm going to, as you can see, it's a little bit different this time around. I'm going to scan this QR code, and I now should be receiving a conference attendee credential. And as you can see, this is a different issuer. So this is the Dutch Blockchain Coalition. So I'm accepting this contact. And as you can see, I'm now getting this conference credential. So let's accept. And well, as you might notice, this credential is expired. That was on purpose because the actual conference is not there anymore. But we chose to keep these credentials around because you can still use it as a demo on the Dutch Blockchain website. So this is using OpenID for VP and SIOP to do the authentication and to transfer this credential. So it will ask, in this case, for the conference credential, as you can see, and I have one available. We will be optimizing this flow, by the way, if there's only one available, to make it a little bit more easy to use. And as you can see, it's satisfying everything. I have to provide the PIN code, and now I'm sharing this credential. And now I'm logged in on the Dutch Blockchain website and can access some information, for instance, about this decentralized identity interop profile. And with that, I've gone a little bit over time, I think, but I would like to conclude. Obviously, we have information about all of the links. Let me see if whether it wants to. Yeah. So these are all the links of both demos as well as all of the open source library, both low level as well as higher level. So I think, for instance, the SSI SDK might be of interest to some parties. Because it's providing all these modules, for instance, for OpenID for VCI as well as for SIOP, and then typically makes distinctions between, for instance, storage of issuer metadata, for instance, but also providing a REST API so that external parties can interact with the VCI issuer as well as manage the issuer. And then there's also REST clients so that you can quite easily integrate it into your own application, for instance. And well, there's all kinds of other stuff like Entra Verified ID integration, well-known DIDs that I mentioned, contact plugins, data storage and issuance branding. So all of the things you saw in terms of issuance branding, you can use those plugins yourself, but you can also, for instance, use UI components. So those card views, for instance, they are all separate, so you can use those as well. And with that, I'm going to conclude because otherwise I just keep talking.
Great. I don't think we're actually out of time. So if there are a few other things you wanted to share, we can take like 5 minutes to share those. And there is also a question in our chat by Andre. He wants to know how you handle possible security issues with QR code.
That's a really generic question. obviously, whenever a security issue is being presented, yeah, we're happy to hear about it. Right now, we do have to be clear about it that in the current state, the code still needs work. So also the low-level code still needs work. So especially, for instance, the SIPE and OpenID for VP library still needs work, and we are actually working on that over the next few weeks. Yeah, always happy if there's security issues for people to reach out. Oh, sorry. I think I now understand the question a bit more. So it's specifically about the QR code. Yeah, yeah, a really good one. Of course, with the QR code, you really want to have an out-of-band mechanism as well. So something like a PIN code, for instance, which you then transfer either separately via separate screen, via separate transport mechanism like email. To be clear, the libraries and as well as the wallet do support those flows. So you can have a second factor, basically.
Okay, hope that answers your question, Andre. Okay, do we have any other question? Simon Mechanik. And thank you, Niels, for this presentation. It was fantastic, and I'm hopeful that our community members that would be viewing later on will definitely learn a lot from it.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a few questions. So first of all, thanks for the presentation. It was very thorough and yeah, answered a lot of questions that I had previously about these standards and stacks and the profiles. So thank you for that. So I was curious, like you mentioned that some of these standards, or maybe all of the ones you mentioned, don't really need to use DIDs as issuers or subjects, I guess. But have you encountered clients that actually use them like that, or is it just mentioned that you don't have to use DIDs?
No, I mentioned that we don't have to use DIDs. At the same time, I am getting, just from my insights from different people, a bit closer to the work ongoing in, for instance, the architecture reference framework, that DIDs probably will not be part of the architecture reference framework. But that's just hearsay, of course. Nothing definitive. And although I think that would be a missed opportunity if that happens. Although I do get it, because of course there's quite a bit of focus right now on natural persons. And well, you don't want to end up with DIDs, especially not in Europe, on a ledger for natural persons. So I do sort of get why people are a little bit hesitant to be using DIDs. On the other hand, if you're talking about organizations and also, for instance, in use cases like well, I mentioned the product passport, using DIDs, for instance, for service discovery, for product discovery and stuff like that makes total sense. So, and also for organizational key rotations and stuff like that, and service endpoints, it makes total sense. So I don't think that's that will be sort of like not supported in the future, but it does look like right now in the first version it might not make it.
Okay, I was just curious, like if there's any information about how you'll be able to do holder binding if no DIDs are used.
Yeah, there is a nice specification. So what will happen, for instance, also is that just like you have users attesting and sending out credentials, you will also have wallets attesting. So it will sort of like be done in multiple layers. So wallets will need to be vetted, will need to be certified, and they will also need to do attestations, basically, so that you know, because that's of course one of the key issues with a wallet is, no pun intended, but you don't know whether those keys are securely stored in a wallet, for instance. So you don't know whether keys can be copied quite easily from one wallet to another, could be hacked or whatever, whether secure elements, hardware security modules are being used or not. So that's why they want to do that in multiple stages, if you wish.
Okay, that's very interesting, because like in the general web world, I guess there's a fight against this kind of attestation of actual browsers in that case, but in our case, we will have like attested wallets. Okay, that's interesting to know. Yeah, I think there's a question in the chat. Feel free to answer that one. I have more.
Yeah, sure. As mentioned before, I am from Brazil, and we have a huge potential in the SSI field. Besides, we have access to interesting markets. Therefore, my question is, how can I have a partnership with Sphereon? Simply reach out, and then everything comes together. No, just kidding. But I'm not kidding about the reach out, of course. But always happy to be talking about this technology, because of course, I cannot go over all the things we're doing, but for instance, we're also working on what is called a social wallet, which is the technology being used in social environments, meaning people with low incomes who might get some money or get services from the government, or people who are in need in shelter, for instance. All of these types of use cases will be possible also with some of the technology that we are creating, and especially, of course, in areas where, well, Brazil these days, I think is coming along quite nicely, but there's still probably an awful lot of people still who are unbanked or who don't have proper access to certain technology, and that's what we also try to solve. So simply reach out to me, and happy to get you in contact with some of my colleagues and discuss to see whether there is some potential to work together.
Great. I guess he would be reaching out through Discord or
Yep.
Okay, so here's Niels Klomp on our
I can also leave my email address in
Perfect.
the chat.
Okay. Thanks for that. Marsha, you mentioned you have more questions, so we still have about
Yeah, I have a couple of more technical questions. I'm not sure if this is the right way to discuss this, but it's just like curiosities. Maybe some other folks find them interesting. So I guess one
I'm
of
happy
them
to discuss. I'm not sure whether Amarachi is okay with it, but
all right, shoot.
okay, so I was curious if you had to limit your storage options for credentials to database engines that support querying for some of the constraints that are defined in the presentation exchange spec. Or
sorry,
otherwise, so in the presentation exchange spec, I know that there's a lot of mention of like JSON path for choosing like attributes of the credentials that you have to match against. Now, I am curious if you use those to query directly based on the credentials, or
yeah. So what we do is, in the low-level library, we expect that you are providing a set of credentials, either in JSON format or JSON-LD, or a combination, of course. And that could be sort of all of your credentials, or it could be a subset of your credentials. And then in the integration in the SDK, what we're doing is basically getting all the credentials from the database, which is it would be nicer, of course, if we could invert that process by indeed searching for specific things in the database directly. That would be more optimized. But right now, we're basically passing all the credentials sort of to the callback function in the library, meaning that it will get access to all the credentials and then filter out every credential which is not applicable.
I see. Okay. Well, we are on the lookout for solutions to this problem. Like, generally speaking, how do you integrate these credential specifications into existing database engines, or like maybe there's something that can be built on top or on the side that kind of like optimizes this whole process. But we definitely want to add this kind of support to the Veramo storage engine, essentially.
Yeah,
so
I think that's definitely something to be looking for, how we could solve it, because we're also having, for instance, with another vendor, Northern Block, which is also a well-known vendor in the SSI space, we're also looking at how we can extend, for instance, sort of the query capabilities indeed of credentials matching for a presentation definition, for instance. So yeah, that's definitely something that I'm happy to look at with you guys.
Wonderful. All right. Cool. Just one more technical curiosity, let's say. So in your demos, you showed how the application or browser was calling the wallet with a query, essentially. And I was curious what kind of technology you used to make this kind of jump. Like, is it deep links or?
Yeah, those are deep links, and that's of course also again a sort of problem, especially on iOS. Right now, sort of the specifications sort of require deep links or suggest deep links. But of course, one of the problems, especially on iOS, is that, and I don't know what the exact mechanism is, whether it's either the first application that you've installed or the last. I think it's the last application that you installed, which support a particular deep link, gets to handle that deep link. So on Android, you have this selection option. And then you can also say, hey, look, always use this application for these types of links. But you don't have that on iOS. So you will always go to a particular application, which might not necessarily be your own application. And it might even be an application which is trying to trick you, of course. So which was created on purpose to hijack your session, basically, and make it look like an existing application. Of course, you have universal links, but they are bound to the application itself, which means that you have a problem in terms of being able to support that in your own closed ecosystem, maybe. So if you have a very particular issuer and very particular wallet, then of course you could be using those. But if you are just using a fully open wallet like we are on the internet with all kinds of different issuers and verifiers, yeah, that doesn't work. An interesting thought right now is that we're participating in the Jobs for the Future Plugfest, which is a Plugfest organized also by the WCC Verifiable Credentials EDU work group and sponsored by I forgot the foundation, a really big American organization. So we're there in a Plugfest, making sure that we are interoperable, in this case for OpenID for VP. And what's happening there is maybe people are aware of CHAPI, the Credential Handler API, created by Digital Bazaar, which was focused on the VC API, which is also a W3C community specification. But the interesting bit is that they've now also integrated OpenID for VCI in it. And also the interesting bit is that they can be working together with universal links in the sense that they are hosting sort of like a bit of JavaScript on a page. And then you can register even, you can register your web wallets, for instance, but you can also register native wallets as long as you have a manifest file on your website, which then means that from that point on, you can select which wallet to use, for instance. So that sort of gets around the problem you will have with universal links if you would only use universal links directly. Really long answer to your question, sorry.
No, it's really what I was looking for. So thank you for that. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, thanks a lot for answering and for the presentation itself. Sure. Really awesome.
Yes. Yep. Thank you, Niels. I definitely enjoyed your presentation. Do we have any other questions? Or...
Yeah, again, from me, not a question, but a prompt to list some of these links in the awesome list on the Veramo website, wherever you think it makes sense. So just raise a PR. It's free advertising space for anything connected to SSI, VC, Veramo. So cool. Yeah, go ahead.
We'll definitely do, because indeed I think, well, we've discussed that for instance, the presentation exchange, we would really like to love to have that to move towards Veramo itself, because I think that also makes sense, for instance, from a DITCOM perspective, being able to use presentation exchange from there, of course. And maybe, yeah, we have some other things as well, which are still right now in our own repositories and might not necessarily have to be in our own repositories. Yeah, definitely also looking forward to having a bit of discussion about what might make sense to move over to Veramo directly.
Yeah, thank you. And also like taking this opportunity to thank you for the previous contributions to Veramo core.
Sure.
So for people who don't know, Sphereon has been contributing stuff for a long time to the Veramo framework. So thank you for that.
Yeah, but that's that goes both ways, because when we started looking, okay, we didn't want to create wallets in the first place, but when we entered the SSI space, we were looking for a wallet, and then the existing wallets were not really sort of modular and not extensible. And then if we would have taken one of the wallets, we probably would have to rebuild almost everything and refactor everything. So that's why we, when we saw Veramo, of course, said, okay, this is promising. So it goes both ways. Without you guys, we probably wouldn't have been here today as well. So
awesome. That's great to hear.
That's great to hear, really. Thank you, Niels. Okay,
Yeah.
so I think we're already at the end of the time of the community call. Before we wrap up, I would like to sincerely apologize once again for the the glitch we had earlier. I'm actually glad that we continued past that, and now we had a fantastic session. And thank you, Andre, for rejoining even after we cut out. And Niels, thank you as well for staying through and through from the first Zoom down to the second Zoom, and still went ahead to deliver an excellent presentation. And of course, thank you, Simon, Nick, and Mercia, for always being here. You're always here, so thank you. With this, we come to the end of the community call for August, and I look forward to seeing you all next month, that's September, for our next community call.